Hello, welcome to Creating Portland. I'm your host, Pearson Kunz, and on this podcast, I'll be interviewing progressive creators who are using their art to shape the culture of our city and beyond. I hope you enjoy this episode of Creating Portland. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited to have you listening today because we have a very cool guest on the pod, and their name is Max Voltage, and they're a lifelong Oregonian, a non-binary queer artist, activist, creating and producing grassroots queer art in Portland for over 19 years, including a drag troupe, a diverse dance ensemble, a one-person show about gender, a sci-fi musical, and a time-traveling boy band. Whoa, I'm so excited to get into all that. Max uses storytelling, humor, music, dance, drag, pop culture, costuming, props, camp, and satire to create accessible, entertaining musical theater centering underrepresented voices and inspiring the imagination. Welcome to the pod, Max.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we are so excited to have you, and we will just jump right on into the big question, which is how are you and your art helping to create Portland?
Absolutely. Well, I think my bio answers that question a little bit, but
Yes, it does.
just being a long-time Portlander and a lifelong Oregonian, I am very connected to Portland and the culture here and the community here. And it's so important to create spaces and to create art and opportunities to really let the community express themselves and have that access to art. So that's been a huge driver for me. I think originally, so my first sort of performance work in Portland was a drag troupe with my drag queen brother, Devin M, and we had a drag troupe called Uber Gay Cabaret.
Love it.
And Kings, Queens, and In-Betweens was our tagline. And we also won the San Francisco Drag King competition. So this was like in the early odds, it was like 2003, 2004. And it was like, I just wanted a stage. I just wanted to perform. And I realized very quickly that in order to have the space I wanted, I had to create it myself. Like it wasn't there, right? There wasn't like a lot happening at that point in Portland. It was like the really like mainstream drag and gay bars, but there wasn't that gender bendy queer drag, and there was barely even like a queer scene yet. You know, it was I think it's cycles. I think it's cyclical. But so I started producing shows and kind of just learning on the fly how to book a venue. And you know, we often wouldn't have a whole show's worth of content. So we started like, okay, what burlesque performers do we know? And what other drag performers? We had Jinx Monsoon was in a show of ours at one point. Like, you know, it was just like old Portland. Like it was, yeah, you know, like just a bunch of like baby queers making drag and, you know, thrift shop costumes and duct tape, cardboard glue guns.
Yes.
You know, just DIY the whole thing. So that's just definitely how I got started in producing shows. And sort of also then creating space for other people too, to be like, I want this space, but wow, there's all these amazing, talented people all around us who also are like hungry for that. So that just definitely, I feel like I've just kind of gone from there. So and then as I grow as an artist, I create spaces that I want to see, and then tend to, you know, attract other artists to me who also have those skills or who have that talent, who are drawn to that, and create space for them as well. And I do, as I've grown and as I've learned, I also try to put a lot of intention into really reaching out to people and curating more intentionally in terms of who I'm collaborating with or who I'm featuring in terms of really highlighting underrepresented queer voices and making sure that I'm using my privilege in that way to really share the spotlight and share the stage. So it sort of started as, I can't be in every number and I need a costume change, so I need other people. And now it's sort of become more of a deeper philosophy that counterbalances sort of my privilege as a white person and the fact that I have all these skills and not everyone wants to like put together a budget or write a grant, or I mean, not that I like super want to, but I see the necessity for it and I know how to do it, and I've really honed those skills, so I'm able to do that almost as sort of a service to my community.
Yes, I love that. I'm a producer myself for the film side of things.
Nice.
And yeah, it's not glamorous, but it is an art in itself to get all of those numbers figured out in a way that actually brings something into light. And I love what you said earlier too. I think it's definitely a danger in the queer community, particularly the white queer community, and I'll be honest, the white gay community, of thinking, okay, this thing is queer, so we're good. We have the diversity. It's already revolutionary. It's already, just because we queers are doing it, it's already so provocative. Which is maybe true to a certain extent, but there is so much diversity within the queer community itself that needs to be uplifted, and I love that you're putting that at the forefront.
Thank you.
And so what does that look like for you to curate that spaces? You're talking about inviting other people. Is there any sort of other, what's that process like to ensure that the diversity is represented in your queer events?
Yeah, I think I hit a bit of a wall when I was curating. So I had a cabaret series called Momentum that ran for 3 years. It started at the E Room and then ended at the Fez Ballroom. None of these venues exist anymore.
Okay, I was going to
say, yeah. So
ringing bells.
It's challenging. So many of the venues that I loved working with just don't even exist. I think there's like condominiums there now, but it was really started out as like, okay, who do we know? Who are our friends? You know, what can we put on stage? And I started out with a event production partner for the first year, and then that partnership ended. But so then I was the next 2 years, you know, doing it alone, emceeing it, producing it, curating it, and booking about 10 acts per show and having a show every month. So it was just this like massive amount of work. I look back, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And it was just this massive amount of work. And then there was this sort of, I would have contracts with performers around, okay, if there's violence, check in first before putting violence on the stage. If you're performing a culture that isn't yours, like that's not all right. Like we need to have, or if there's any gray area, like let's check in. And so as I got more sophisticated, I sort of created these contracts and these really explicit agreements around like what I wanted on my stage. And, you know, there was like pushback, like don't censor me, that kind of thing. I'm like, I'm not censoring you. I'm creating a stage and I'm creating a brand and I'm creating an anti-oppression queer space, and I'm not inviting you in there if you don't fit into what I want to do and the politics that this space is. So, you know, there was drama, there was conflict, there was struggle, and there were moments like there were things I missed, and there were things that there was a number that got on stage that then I got pushback from the community, and I think that was like sort of at the end of the third season. And at that point I was pretty burnt out already on event production. I was sort of coming to the end of that and had this idea to write Momentum, the musical, that was kind of inspired by my community and by the themes that we had done in the cabaret and that grassroots energy. So I was sort of headed off in this other direction, but I also realized, like, as a white person, like, I'm going to miss things. I'm going to miss things, right? Because my lived experience and my privilege, and as hard as I work to do that work and to challenge my privilege and to read articles and, you know, surround myself with people that will, you know, help me learn as well and tell me when I'm off track, like, I'm gonna miss stuff. And so I think that was why when I formed Turnback Boys, it was really important to me, and I did a lot of work specifically reaching out to communities of color and queer communities of color, saying like, I really want folks of color in this project, and not like just like I'm handing you a script and here's your part and here's your role, but as in like, this is a collaborative musical theater ensemble, right? We each are creating our own characters. We are each telling the story that we want to tell. So I'm not telling you what era you have to be from or anything. We're in this like sort of together creatively. And then I'm the one that's like booking the shows and like updating the website and like, you know, doing that band management stuff, super glamorous. But like making sure that like we have multiple folks of color in the room when the content is being created is so important. And then also just having, I did this with Home Ends in the musical, making sure you are able to do a read through, you know, making sure you have people in the audience that are part of those communities to say, hey, this rubbed me the wrong way, or like, let's talk about this. And we had a little talk back afterwards. And just, again, like being aware of our blind spots, you know, being aware that we don't know everything and we're not going to catch everything, and doing the work to figure out how to still, I still want to make work. You know what I mean? Like I had this moment where I was like, oh, it's so hard to like still figure out how to make radical anti-oppression, radical queer art as a white person and feel good about it. So this is sort of this is where I've gotten to, but it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah. Oh, I resonate with a lot of what you're saying there. Jeez. But yeah, and it sounds like the key thing there too is just being so open to that feedback and being open to adjusting the piece because of that. I think a lot of artists hold their art so sacred that feedback and criticism and adjusting for other people, like you were saying earlier, they would consider it censorship or like being tamped down in some way, when in reality it's making it available to more people, and it's making it so that your audience can be even bigger.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, you have your artistic hand in so many different pots, it sounds like, which is so exciting to get to our second segment, which is what are you loving about the Portland art scene? What's working really well? And it sounds like you have a really cool grasp on what's working there. And then what is maybe where we need to improve, we need to get some more work in?
Yeah. It's funny because I am so Portland. Like I don't like always realize it until I like leave Portland and people are like, oh my God, you're so Portland. And I'm like, wait, what did I say? Like I don't even, why? So I was reflecting on this. I was like, what is Portland? I think the culture of Portland I love, and it is very much what my art is, you know, at its best, right? Especially like queer radical Portland, where we are questioning everything. You know, we are writing our own rules. We are embracing our eccentricities. We are queer and gender bending. We are polyamorous and kinky. We are femme, and, you know, like we are pushing boundaries all the time, you know, and we are like, I think that we are often on the forefront of those conversations and on those tensions. I also love that Portland, we have so much nature around us. And I think that also is part of the culture of Portland, is this sort of like spirituality, this like very woo, very feelings, very tender, very like witchy, into astrology, you know, like those kind of energies as well. Those energies there, that's Portland, you know, that the energies. And I think it's hard because I feel like when Portlandia hit, you know, and then it sort of, the culture of Portland sort of became this like cheap sort of punchline, and some of them were sort of funny, but like it was hard because it was like, no, but like it sort of, I feel like it sort of took some of the magic, it was trying to take some of the magic away, in a way, because it's like by making fun of it. And I think we do have a sense of humor about ourselves, but I think it's just like so much of Portland is rolled into my art. It's rolled into who I am. And I'm like from here too. I grew up in the suburbs, and I was part of the Metropolitan Youth Symphony, and I would like grow up coming up to like Northwest 23rd Avenue was like the cool place to be, and like Hawthorne, ooh, what? So, you know, I think as a kid too, I was like very adjacent to Portland culture too. So it's almost hard to articulate sometimes, because I'm like, it's in my blood. But I love it, and I think that I'm constantly like surprised and delighted by the conversations that are happening here, and the art that comes out of the city is amazing. And you know, there's a tension, because it was a small city, and now it's like not a small city. So you know, I think there's a lot when you say like what's hard about Portland, you know, is I think there's a lot of tension there. I think, like, I love that Portlanders, like, just if you want to make something happen, you make it happen. You don't wait for someone else to, like, give you permission to do it. I think that's something else that's really beautiful about Portland. And also the fact that, like, people don't come here to get famous. Like, people don't come here like they do in New York and LA to be like, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to make my career in art. But it's full of like so much talent. So it's this other culture that's like really talented, but it's also like doing it for like kind of different reasons maybe than like people that are trying to like make it. So I feel like there's a real like grassroots, real like integrity to a lot of the art that comes out of Portland.
Wow, this is so positive. I'm just like, yes, you're exactly right. And I think it's, especially with this podcast, it's been so easy to critique and like challenge a lot of what's happening in Portland. But I love to hear those things, because you're so spot on. And I haven't heard that sort of explicitly stated about the connection to nature, but it is so true and so tangible once you say it. I'm thinking of all these pieces and all of these people that are so reminiscent of that energy, like you're saying.
Yeah. So, and I think we're also like, we do have that community connection. We do understand community in a way that I think some bigger cities kind of don't have to in the same way. So I love that too. But I definitely have some struggles with Portland too, you know, but
let's go into those. What where do you think we need to start heading? What do you think we need to start working on within this community that we do obviously have a lot of good things going for us?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's gotten way harder to be an artist in Portland. As someone that's been doing this for almost 2 decades, it has gotten so much harder. And there are so many intersecting reasons behind that. You know, our rent doubled in the amount of, in like 3 years, in like the late aughts. All of a sudden we were paying twice as much rent, you know? So I think it was this quite sort of queertopia in the early aughts where people weren't having to work that much. We were all working like 20-hour-a-week customer service jobs, and we all had like spending money, and we were like spending all this extra time making costumes and thinking about our next, you know, performance number. And it was really amazing, and people we were really hungry for community. There was this like hunger, and I felt it in the audience, and I felt it in the community. And I think it's hard because, you know, venues have gone away. So many venues are and queer spaces as well. We lost Embers last year. There was another gay bar that just closed too.
CC Slaughter's just closed in quarantine.
I'm like, what?
Yeah, which was crazy.
Yeah, so it's really challenging, because I think that for me as a queer artist, like, I would not be the artist I am today if I did not have my drag king community, if I did not have dive bars and shows that were $5 to $10 sliding scale, and, dirty queer and things that you could get on stage, and as an artist you could develop, you could take risks, you could say, I'm not an artist, but I'm going to read this poem, and you could really have that opportunity. And I think it's just a lot harder to create those now because there's so many less venues, and we're all hustling constantly. We're just constantly hustling to just make our rent and just have enough. So I think the whole culture, I think probably Portland, we were in a little bubble, and other big cities were already experiencing that. And then all of a sudden we became like known, and then the bubble just kind of burst. So we had this really dramatic going from this like, small town to a small city to a big city, like practically what felt like overnight. So I think that's been really challenging. And I think for myself, I'm just like, it's really hard to find that balance, to have enough time and energy to still make art and still do what I love and also have that stability. So I think it's not necessarily Portland specific. I think it's probably a national problem around economics. It's a problem around late stage capitalism and all of us getting squished. And, we need universal income. We need student debt forgiveness. We need, local businesses to have support. We need, there's so much like help that we collectively need. And I think that artists are getting pushed out of cities a lot of times too, and because we can't afford it. But then it's like that was a thing that brought people to the cities in the first place, was the vibrant art scene. So it's so frustrating, and I don't know, it just kind of makes me want to scream.
Yeah, I feel you totally. No, yeah, and the thing too, I think a lot of artists, and I'm sure you've experienced this as a producer, is that lots of artists don't want the art to be separate from the money, want the art to be separate from those sort of economic factors that are going on. They just want to focus on their art, which makes sense, and they should be able to have that kind of focus you're talking about, that kind of extra time.
Yeah.
I think in our sort of capitalistic mindset, we're saying you should have a 40-hour work week, no matter who you are, which for artists in a city like you're saying, where making art your total career is not as likely, is maybe not possible, which is so challenging to grapple with.
Well, and I've worked for a few different theater companies in Portland as well. And early on in my sort of creative career, I was like, maybe I'll start a nonprofit. And the longer I worked in nonprofits, the more I was like, hell no, I'm not going to do that, because I think that there can be some exceptions, and I think that there's a lot of conversation there, but overall, right, nonprofits are still having been run essentially by board of directors, and boards' primary responsibility is fundraising. Okay, so your boards are always going to be people with money. Majority of the people on the board are going to have money. And so you have these economic forces in theater companies that steer them toward white people, steer them toward people with money, because that's who's paying for the theater company. So it's these infrastructures of like who actually gets to be professional artists. You have to be able to fit into these constructs of the nonprofit industrial complex.
Yeah.
You have to be able to fundraise.
Real dark. Yeah.
And when you're making art for working class radical queers, that becomes a fucking problem. Because I haven't literally my whole time, there's maybe been a couple shows but mostly my sliding scale starts at $5 and always has. Because there are many times in my life where I would not have gone to a show if it was more than $5, because I would not have been able to afford it. And I want the people I'm making the art for to get to see the art. But my cost of living have more than doubled. The venue costs have doubled. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's so hard to keep it accessible. Not to mention the fact that now we have Netflix. Now we have YouTube. Now we have all these ways to be entertained and not leave the house. So I think that that's also a bigger issue with live theater and live performance now competing against all these other, entertaining portals that they don't offer community in the same way, but man, they're a lot easier to get to, and they're starting to have a lot more queer content. So, that also ends up making it harder, I think, for those of us making live queer shows happen to get people out to the shows.
Right. And I mean, it's just totally exacerbated by this whole lockdown, quarantine, pandemic situation where we're literally not allowed to go out to the shows. And what's that going to look like when we are able to? Are people going to want to? How are we going to get them back? How are we going to draw them in after, like you're saying, Netflix and YouTube has been the only option and won them over?
Yeah.
Oh, that's scary and dark to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of the reason why I've started taking media classes at Open Signal. And, the boy band right now, we're recording our first album. And so that means we've made our first music video, and it's funny because we can't be in the same room, but we each are just filming our different parts, and editing them together. So I think for us and for someone that's been so focused on the live performance stuff, we're using this as a catalyst to really focus a little bit more on creating online content so that we can reach a larger audience, because we have a pretty solid Portland fan base and a little bit West Coast, but just figuring out ways to get our art out there and on different platforms and stuff that doesn't require the whole event production, live show,
right,
being in a room with 200 other people thing.
Yeah, it's bleak, but it's the future. Okay, and then maybe let's bring it up just right here at the end. What is your dream for the Portland art scene? What does a dream scenario look like for Portland art for you?
Yeah, I get in my time machine and I go back to 2004, JK. Finding elements of that again, I think is important to have those live spaces and to have those rough around the edges shows, and also be able to have a whole spectrum of opportunities for people wherever they are in their artist career, without necessarily meaning that they have to compete against each other, right? The amount of grants that are available for individual artists are I can count on one hand, and just having a lot more grant opportunities that would really fund and prioritize local queer infrastructure, and figuring out ways to do longer term funding to say we believe in this artist and we're going to actually fund them for 5 years to because if you want to do bigger projects, right, I have a dream of a web series and making my musical into a movie and all these things, and it's really it's really overwhelming to think about how I'm going to fund that, or how I'm going to put time aside for that, and also work my day job and be able to have the stability there. So I think I'm we have Turnback Boys has a Patreon account. I think that's a really great model. Having more folks support artists directly in that way is exciting. It's exciting that we can reach our audiences directly and not have gatekeepers, right? There's some really exciting things about that, and with social media we can exchange ideas so well and so quickly, and we can really innovate. So it's figuring out sort of how to take the best components, I think, of the technology as it's innovated, and also have that accountability. I think it's really important to be accountable to your community. And I think that's why I love local art, because you're like, I'm looking at the people. I'm on the stage. I'm looking at you. I can tell if this is going well or not. You know, and I think it's important for people to have those opportunities to learn as artists, to say, wow, that worked and that didn't work, and what am I learning from that, and how I'm going to try again, and figuring out. I feel like there's this myth of artists that are like the genius artist, right? That's like that you're just like, you're touched by God. You're like, you have genius. You didn't have to work on it. You're just like, ta-da. And I think that really undermines what it actually takes to be a talented artist.
Absolutely.
And sort of releases society from any sort of accountability toward helping make good artists. Like, we have a choice, right? Do we have venues? Do we have grant systems? Do we have, rent control? Do we have, income? Do we have ways that people can survive and still make their art and grow as artists? To become a brilliant artist means you have to spend most of your life doing that.
Right.
And that's expensive.
Wow.
But we can't, it's like, then if we only have people with privilege making art, then it's like, again, it's where we're at with like so much of mainstream media being like so terrible, because it's the people with privilege that are making the decisions, and they seem to be out of ideas, to be honest with you. And it's like, pass me the ball. I'm opened. Like, I have so many ideas. I'm ready to have a movie. Multiple television shows are in my head. I've got a freaking soundtrack back here. I've got a boy band over here. Like, let's do this. Like, someone just pass me the ball. And by the ball, I mean an infrastructure and money and time. You know? But some people do get passed the ball over and over and over again, and they're making mediocre crap. So I don't know what to tell you.
Well, that is an incredible way to round us out. Somebody, please, for the love of all that is good, give Max Voltage the ball.
I can't believe I just ended on a sports metaphor. That's just
I know. That's very straight of you.
Very off-brand for me, but...
Interesting. Yeah. Well, I loved it, and I hope that really resonates with people. It sure did with me. Max, where can people find you online?
My website is maxvoltagepdx.com. Most of my creative energy is headed into Turnback Boys. That's Turnback Boys with a Z. And turnbackboys.com. And we're also on Instagram and Facebook at Turnback Boys.
Incredible. Well, we will link that in the description. And thank you so much for being here, Max. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Creating Portland with me, Pearson Kunz. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe, and check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Creating PDX, or on our website, creatingpdx.com. This podcast was brought to you by Wolf and Thunder Productions and Golden Pride Productions. See you next time. Bye!